My brother stood up at his own rehearsal dinner and introduced me to his future in-laws as the one who handles our family's finances. I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. Not because it was funny. Because I was sitting at a table I had paid for, wearing a dress I had bought on clearance, eating food I had arranged and partially funded, and the best title he could give me was the one who handles finances. Like I was an accountant they'd hired. Like I wasn't his sister. Like the last 4 years of my life hadn't been quietly handed over to keeping his family afloat. I should back up. My name is Tessa, and I'm a registered nurse. I've been working at a hospital outside of Columbus, Ohio since I was 23. 12-hour shifts, rotating nights, the kind of job where you come home and your feet hurt so bad, you sit on the edge of the bathtub just to get your shoes off before you even make it to the bedroom. I love it though. I genuinely do. There's something about it that feels like the one place where what I do actually matters in a measurable way. My brother was Sil. I'll call him my brother because that's what he is, even now, is 4 years older than me. He was always the one my parents were proud of first. He played baseball in high school, got decent grades, had a girlfriend by sophomore year. I was the quiet one, the one who studied, the one who didn't cause problems. After I graduated nursing school and got my first real paycheck, things at home got complicated fast. My dad had been working construction for most of my life, but his back had been getting worse for years. By the time I was 24, he was on partial disability and my parents were behind on basically everything. 2 months on their mortgage. A car payment. My mom's prescription costs had ballooned because her insurance changed and nobody had figured out the new system yet. It felt like every week there was a new fire. I stepped in. I told myself it was temporary. That's the word I kept using in my head, temporary. I'd cover the mortgage for a few months, help them get stabilized, and then things would even out. My dad would find lighter work. My mom would get her prescriptions sorted. My brother, who was living with his girlfriend at the time in an apartment about 40 minutes away, would chip in once he got more settled. That was 4 years ago. The mortgage never became temporary. My dad found some part-time work doing home inspections, but it was inconsistent. 2 jobs, 1 month, nothing the next. My mom's costs stabilized but didn't go away. And my brother, he and his girlfriend got engaged. Let me tell you about my brother's engagement, because this is where I need you to understand something. When he called me to share the news, I was genuinely happy for him. I really was. Noelle, his fiancée, is a sweet person. She works in marketing. She's kind to my parents. She makes my brother laugh in a way I hadn't seen in years. I liked her from the start. What I didn't anticipate was the way the engagement seemed to reclassify me in everyone's mind. Almost immediately, my brother started calling more often, not to check in, not to talk, to ask, "Hey, so the venue we're looking at requires a deposit by the end of the month. Do you think you could help with that?" And I would say, "How much?" And he would say the number, and I would go quiet for a second and then say, "Okay," because what was I going to say? Over the following year and a half, I contributed to their engagement party, a chunk of their venue deposit, 2 of their catering tastings, and a hotel block they'd reserved for out-of-town guests. Each time it was framed as just helping out. Each time I said yes. Each time I told myself this was what family did. Meanwhile, I was taking the bus to work 3 days a week because my car needed a repair I kept putting off. I ate a lot of pasta that year, not because I couldn't have made more financially responsible choices. I know I could have. But because I had convinced myself that what I was doing was noble. That being the person who held everything together was a role worth having. What I didn't see, or maybe didn't want to see, was that nobody else thought of it as noble. They thought of it as normal, expected. Just the way things were. There was a dinner at my parents' house sometime in the fall before the wedding. My brother and Noelle had come over, which was nice, and my mom had made a big pot of chili and cornbread, and it felt almost like it used to feel when we were kids. My dad was in a decent mood. Noelle was telling a story about a work trip to Denver. At some point, the conversation turned to the wedding and what was left to plan, and I mentioned, casually, that I'd been pretty tired lately with my shifts and was looking forward to things settling down a little. My brother looked at me and said, completely without meanness in his voice. That's what gets me. There was no malice, just this flat assumption. Well, we still need to figure out the rehearsal dinner. Mom and Dad can't really do it, so we were kind of hoping you might be able to contribute to that too. I looked at him, then at my parents. My mom was very focused on her chili. I said, "How much were you thinking?" He shrugged. "Probably around 2,000. I didn't say anything for a moment. I think I nodded. I think I said something like, "I'll look at my budget." And then I went back to eating and the conversation moved on, and nobody asked if I was okay, or whether that was a lot to ask, or whether maybe my brother, who had a full-time job in IT and a fiancé who was employed, might figure out another way. That was the night I should have said something. I know that now, but I didn't. I paid for the rehearsal dinner. It was at a private room in an Italian restaurant downtown. Noel's family came in from Michigan. My parents were there. My brother's college friends. His future in-laws, who were perfectly nice people and had no idea, as far as I could tell, that the woman quietly sitting at the end of the table had written the check for the whole evening. And that's when it happened. Noel's father, a big, friendly man who sold insurance in Grand Rapids, leaned across the table and said to my brother, "So this is your sister. Tell me about her." My brother grinned, looked at me, and said, "This is Tessa. She's the one who handles all of our family's finances." The table laughed, like it was charming, like it was a little family joke. I laughed too. I genuinely cannot explain to you why I laughed. Reflex maybe. Self-preservation. The same mechanism that had kept me quiet for 4 years. But later that night, driving home, I turned off the radio and just sat with the silence for the whole 40-minute drive, and something in me that had been very slowly bending for a very long time finally went still. Not broken, just still. Done bending. I didn't do anything dramatic that night. I didn't call him. I didn't send a text. I just went home, made a cup of tea, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop to look at exactly what I had spent on my brother's life over the past 4 years. I keep a spreadsheet. I know that sounds clinical, but I'm a nurse. I document things. It's in my nature. I had every transfer, every Venmo, every time I put something on my card. The number was $43,000. I sat with that for a long time. I got up and rinsed my cup. I went to bed. I stared at the ceiling. $43,000. That was a down payment. That was my car, fixed, twice over. That was the trip to Portugal I'd been putting on a vision board since I was 26. That was a year of my life, measured out in groceries and mortgage payments and rehearsal dinners that I apparently handled. The wedding was 6 weeks later. I went. Of course I went. I wore the bridesmaid dress they picked, dusty rose, not my color, but genuinely fine. And I stood up at the altar with Noel's 2 sisters, and I smiled in every photo, and I meant it, mostly. Because the ceremony was actually beautiful, and Noel cried when she saw my brother waiting for her, and that part was real, regardless of everything else. The reception was at a vineyard outside the city. String lights, long wooden tables, a band that mostly played acoustic covers. During the cocktail hour, I was standing near the bar with a glass of white wine when Noel's mother came up to me. She was warm, the kind of person who touches your arm when she talks to you. She said, "Your brother talks about you all the time, you know. He says you've always been the responsible one." I said, "Is that what he says?" She laughed. "He says the whole family leans on you, that you're the backbone." I took a sip of my wine. "Yeah," I said, "that's one word for it." She didn't catch the tone, or maybe she did and was gracious enough not to press. We talked about her drive down from Michigan. I excused myself after a few minutes. I found a quiet spot near the edge of the venue, behind one of the big wooden ceremony arches that were being broken down by staff. I had my phone out and I wasn't calling anyone. I just needed a minute. I stood there in my dusty rose dress in the cooling evening air, and I thought, I am done. Not with my family, exactly. Not even with my brother. Not permanently. But with the arrangement. With the assumption. With being the backbone that nobody thought to check on. I did not make a scene at the wedding. I want to be clear about that. I'm not someone who blows things up in public. I believe in direct conversation, even when it's hard. and I believe in timing. A wedding reception was not the time. But 2 weeks after he got back from his honeymoon to Cancun, which I had not contributed to, I want to note, because by then I had quietly started saying no to things, I called my brother and asked if he had an hour to talk. We met at a coffee shop near his apartment. He came in looking relaxed, post-honeymoon tan still on his face, a good mood. He ordered a large coffee and a pastry. I had already been sitting there for 10 minutes. I had printed out the spreadsheet. I slid it across the table. He looked at it, then looked up at me. "What is this?" "It's every dollar I've given to you or to mom and dad on your behalf in the last 4 years, I said. I wasn't going to bring it up. But then you introduced me to Noelle's family as the one who handles finances, and I realized that's actually exactly what I've been doing. So I thought we should look at it together." He stared at the page for a moment. I watched his jaw shift. "Tessa, I'm not asking to be paid back," I said, and I meant it. I had thought about this a lot, and I knew that asking for $43,000 back wasn't the point and wasn't realistic. I'm not bringing this up to punish you. I'm bringing it up because I need things to change, starting now. He looked uncomfortable in the way people look when something they've been avoiding has just sat down across from them and ordered a coffee. "I didn't realize it was that much," he said, which I actually believe. That's the thing about benefiting from someone's quiet generosity. You don't tally it up because you don't need to. The tally is someone else's problem. "I know," I said. "That's part of the issue." We talked for almost 2 hours. It was not a comfortable conversation. He got defensive at points, which I had expected. He said things like, "You always said it was fine, and you never told me it was a burden." And I had to sit there and explain to him, as plainly as I could, that when you are the person who keeps being asked and keeps saying yes, there is a particular kind of pressure in that dynamic that makes saying no feel almost impossible. That you never said anything is not the same as nothing was wrong. To his credit, and I say this without sarcasm, he sat with that. He didn't storm out. He didn't turn it into a fight. By the end of the conversation, he was quieter in a way that felt like something had actually landed. He asked what I needed. I told him. I was going to stop covering the family mortgage. My parents were going to need to refinance, look at their options, possibly downsize. There was a lot of equity in that house, and there were real solutions available to them. They just hadn't had to look for them, because I was always there. I was going to stop being the first call when something needed to be paid for. I was going to start being a sister and a daughter, not a financial fallback. He nodded slowly. He looked at the spreadsheet one more time. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Tess." 3 words, not a grand gesture, not a promise to pay me back or fix everything overnight, just that. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in 4 years. Not because everything was resolved. It wasn't, not even close. My parents were upset when the dynamic changed. There were phone calls that were hard. There was a period where my mom would go quiet on the phone in a way that was meant to communicate disappointment, and I had to learn to just let the silence be there without rushing to fill it with a solution. But I was sleeping better. I fixed my car. I started putting money into my own savings account without immediately calculating who might need it next. In March, I booked a flight to Lisbon. Just me, a week, a small hotel near the river. The first trip I had taken purely for myself in longer than I could remember. I called my brother from the airport, mostly just to talk. He answered on the second ring. "We are not the same as we were before. I don't know if we ever will be. There are things that, once you see clearly, you cannot make blurry again. But we are figuring out what it looks like to be siblings in a way that doesn't quietly hollow out one of us." He told me he and Noelle had started really looking at their own finances, making actual cuts, building a cushion. He said it almost sheepishly, like it was embarrassing to admit they could have been doing this all along. Maybe it was a little embarrassing, but I gave him credit for saying it. I boarded my flight. I had a window seat. Somewhere over the Atlantic, with a cup of bad airplane coffee in my hand and 6 hours of ocean beneath me, I thought about all the years I had believed that holding everything up was the same as being loved. It isn't. Being loved is when the people in your life don't let you carry everything alone. And if you find yourself the only one holding, at some point you have to set it down. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain, where I'm the cold sister who pulled out a spreadsheet at a coffee shop and made her brother feel small. I've thought about that version. I've sat with it honestly because I think you have to if you want to understand what actually happened, rather than just feel righteous about it. But here's what I keep coming back to. The spreadsheet wasn't an attack. It was just the truth. And the truth had been sitting in my laptop for 4 years while I smiled at dinners and said, I'll look at my budget, and drove home alone in silence. What I didn't have for a long time was the clarity to see my own situation accurately. I told myself I was being generous, and maybe in the beginning I was. But somewhere in year 2, generosity had quietly become something else. It had become my identity, my role, the thing that made me feel necessary. And I had confused being needed with being loved. Those are not the same thing, and it took me an embarrassingly long time to understand that. My brother's not a bad person. I want to say that clearly because it matters. He made choices that were easy to make precisely because I never pushed back. When nobody says, this isn't working for me, the natural human tendency is to assume it's working. That's not evil. That's just how people operate when they're not paying close enough attention, and when the person absorbing the cost keeps absorbing it quietly. What I had to develop eventually was the kind of clear-eyed thinking that I'd always applied at work, but never to my own life. At the hospital, I assess situations honestly. I don't tell a patient what they want to hear if it isn't true. I look at the facts and I make decisions based on them. Somewhere along the way, I had completely stopped doing that for myself. I had let feelings, guilt, loyalty, the fear of being seen as selfish, override my own basic judgment. The moment I started applying the same honest assessment to my own situation that I applied to everything else, the path forward became obvious. And then there's the part that nobody really talks about, which is that changing a dynamic like this is genuinely hard. Knowing what needs to happen is one thing, actually doing it. Sitting across from your brother, sliding that piece of paper across the table, watching his face change, that takes something you have to build deliberately. I had spent 4 years making myself smaller and easier and more accommodating, learning to hold a boundary, to stay calm when my mom went quiet on the phone, to book a flight to Lisbon without checking whether anyone needed anything first. That was not natural for me. I had to practice it. It felt wrong before it felt right. The $43,000 is gone. I've made peace with that. What I got in return, eventually, was a relationship with my brother that is actually honest, a savings account that is actually mine, and a life that I am actually living instead of funding everyone else's. Tessa paid a high price for a lesson that should have been free, but most of the important ones are.